Before we start, let's establish something important. Whether you're religious or not, the historical accuracy of these predictions is undeniable. We're not here to debate theology, we're here to examine facts. So grab your history books, because we're about to explore some of the most incredible coincidences in human history, if they are coincidences at all. Prophecy number 7, the scattering of the Jewish people. One of the most far-reaching predictions in all of Scripture concerns the global dispersion of the Jewish people. Centuries before it happened, the Hebrew prophets warned that disobedience to God's covenant would result in their removal from the land of Israel and their dispersal to distant nations. This scattering, known historically as the diaspora, would become one of the most remarkable demographic phenomena in human history. A people exiled from their homeland, yet maintaining their identity across continents and centuries. The foundation of this prophecy appears in Leviticus chapter 26 verse 33. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw out my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste, and your cities will lie in ruins. And centuries later, Moses reiterated the same warning in Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 64. Then the Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one end of the earth to the other. These were not vague predictions of regional displacement. They were declarations that the Jewish people would be dispersed to the very ends of the earth. The fulfillment began in stages. The first large-scale removal came in the 8th century before Christ, when the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and deported much of its population to distant territories. About a century later, the Babylonian Empire carried away the elite of the southern kingdom of Judah, marking the first time Jerusalem's temple was destroyed. Although a partial return occurred under Persian rule, the stage had been set for future, more complete dispersions. The decisive scattering came in the 1st century after Christ, following a series of revolts against the Roman Empire, including the devastating conflict of the years 66 to 70 and the Bar Kokhba uprising in the years 132 to 135, Jewish sovereignty in the land was extinguished. Jerusalem was razed, vast numbers were killed or sold into slavery, and imperial edicts banned Jews from even entering the city. From this point forward, Jewish communities began appearing in virtually every corner of the Roman world, from North Africa to Gaul, from Mesopotamia to the Iberian Peninsula. Over the following centuries, the scattering widened beyond anything the ancient audience could have imagined. Jewish traders established communities along the Silk Road deep into Central Asia. Merchants and scholars migrated into the Arabian Peninsula. Others journeyed along the coasts of the Indian Ocean, settling in places as far away as the Malabar coast of India. In the medieval era, Jewish populations were recorded in the British Isles, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the steppes of Eastern Europe. The prophecy's phrase, from one end of the earth to the other, became a literal description of the Jewish experience. The scattering was not only geographic but cultural. As Jews settled in diverse lands, they adopted local languages while preserving Hebrew for worship. This led to the development of unique dialects such as Ladino, a Judeo-Spanish blend, and Judeo-Arabic, which combined Hebrew script with Arabic vocabulary. Over time, these communities adapted to radically different political systems, climates, and economic conditions, yet they maintained core elements of their identity, from dietary laws to Sabbath observance. What makes this prophecy remarkable is not merely the dispersion itself, but the survival of the dispersed people. Historically, exiled groups either assimilated into host populations or were absorbed into other cultures within a few generations. The Jewish people defied this pattern. From Morocco to China, from Poland to Ethiopia, they retained a distinct religious and cultural framework that tied them back to their ancestral homeland. This tenacity, foreseen in the prophetic writings, ensured that even in exile, the idea of return never died. Archaeological and historical records confirm the vast spread of the Jewish people. Synagogue ruins dating to antiquity have been found in Rome, Ostia, Sardis, Dura Europos, and the Golan Heights, testifying to the early reach of Jewish communities. Medieval travellers like Benjamin of Tudela documented far-flung settlements across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. By the dawn of the modern era, there were established Jewish populations on nearly every continent, including in the Americas, brought there by waves of migration and trade. The prophetic imagery often linked scattering with the condition of the land itself. As foretold, the homeland remained under foreign control for centuries, passing through the hands of empires while its original people were absent. Yet the prophecies did not end with dispersion. Interwoven with the predictions of scattering were promises of regathering, a return from the farthest corners when the appointed time arrived. That second part of the story belongs to other prophecies, but the first half, the scattering, unfolded exactly as described, with a precision and scope unmatched by any other ancient prediction. From the hills of Judea to the ports of the Indian Ocean, from the marketplaces of Alexandria to the villages of Eastern Europe, the Jewish people established a global presence long before the concept of globalization had a name. Their story of dispersion remains one of history's most vivid demonstrations of how words spoken in antiquity can shape the course of millennia. Prophecy number 6, the persecution and suffering. This next prophecy is harder to discuss because it involves immense human suffering, but it's historically documented and was predicted with chilling accuracy. In Deuteronomy 28:65-67, Moses predicted that during their scattering, the Jewish people would find no rest and would live in constant fear. Among those nations you will find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. The prophecy gets even more specific in verses 37 and 46. You will become a thing of horror and an object of scorn and ridicule to all the nations where the Lord will drive you. They will be a sign and a wonder to you and your descendants forever. Unfortunately, history bears this out with tragic and systematic precision. After the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Jews faced immediate persecution. The Romans banned Jews from entering Jerusalem, renamed the land Palestina to erase Jewish connection, and sold thousands into slavery. But this was just the beginning. Starting in the 12th century, Jews were regularly accused of murdering Christian children for ritual purposes, completely false accusations called blood libels. These led to massacres across Europe. In 1144 in Norwich, England, in 1255 in Lincoln, in 1475 in Trent, Italy. Each accusation sparked mob violence and mass killings. When Christian armies marched to the Holy Land during the Crusades in 1096 to 1291, they decided to start their holy war at home. Entire Jewish communities were wiped out in the Rhineland. In Mainz, over 1,000 Jews were killed in a single day. In Jerusalem, when the Crusaders captured the city, they herded Jews into a synagogue and burned it down with everyone inside. The pattern was always the same. Jews were seen as outsiders, blamed for local problems, and became targets for violence. The Spanish Inquisition in 1478 to 1834 was not just about forced conversions. Jews who converted to Christianity, called conversos, were constantly suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. Families were torn apart. Children were encouraged to report their own parents. Over 31,000 people were executed, with Jews making up a significant portion. But here's what's chilling. The prophecy in Deuteronomy 28:32 predicted even this family betrayal. Your sons and daughters will be given to another nation, and you will wear out your eyes watching for them, day after day, powerless to lift a hand. From the 17th to 20th centuries, organised massacres swept through Eastern Europe. The Chmielnicki massacres of 1648 to 1657 killed an estimated 100,000 Jews in Ukraine and Poland. The 1881 to 1884 pogroms in Russia displaced hundreds of thousands. The Kishinev pogrom of 1903 shocked the world with its brutality. Each time the pattern was identical. Economic hardship would hit a region and Jews became the scapegoats. They were accused of causing plagues, poisoning wells, controlling banks, being too successful, or not assimilating enough. Even in enlightened France, Captain Alfred Dreyfus was falsely accused of treason in 1894, primarily because he was Jewish. The case divided French society and revealed deep-seated anti-Semitism, even in democratic nations. Then came the Holocaust, the systematic, industrial-scale murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. What makes this prophetically significant is how the ancient predictions described exactly this kind of systematic persecution. Deuteronomy 28:62 predicted, "You who were as numerous as the stars in the sky will be left but few in number." Before the Holocaust, there were approximately 16.6 million Jews worldwide. After it, only about 10.5 million remained. The prophecy in verse 25 is particularly haunting. "The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You will come at them from one direction, but flee from them in 7. And you will become a thing of horror to all the kingdoms on earth." But here's the remarkable part. The prophecies didn't just predict persecution, they predicted survival through it all, despite every attempt to eliminate them. Jeremiah 30:11 states, "I am with you and will save you. Though I destroy all the nations among which I scatter you, I will not destroy you." Think about this historically. The Babylonians who conquered them? Gone. The Romans who scattered them? Their empire collapsed. The Spanish who expelled them? Lost their global dominance. The Russians who persecuted them? The Soviet Union fell. Nazi Germany? Defeated after 12 years. But the Jewish people? Still here. Historian Paul Johnson calculated that based on historical patterns of persecution and assimilation, the Jewish people should have disappeared as a distinct group by the year 1000 AD. Yet not only did they survive, but they maintained their identity, culture, and connection to their ancient homeland. What makes this even more remarkable is that these prophecies were written during a time when the Israelites were actually doing well. Moses was essentially saying, "You're going to lose everything, be scattered across the world, face unimaginable persecution from every direction, become objects of scorn and ridicule, but somehow survive it all when every other nation that tries to destroy you will itself be destroyed." For most peoples throughout history, even one major persecution would have meant cultural extinction, but not for the Jews, because the prophecies promised something else entirely, that this suffering would ultimately lead to their return home. Prophecy number 5. The preservation of Hebrew language. Here's something that should have been impossible. Keeping a language alive for over 1,800 years when it's no longer spoken in daily life, and then successfully reviving it as a living language. When the Jews were scattered after 70 AD, Hebrew essentially became what linguists call a liturgical language, used only for religious ceremonies and scholarly study, like Latin today. For nearly 2 millennia, Jews spoke the languages of their host countries: Yiddish in Eastern Europe, Ladino in Spain, Judeo-Arabic in North Africa, Judeo-Persian in Iran, and dozens of other regional dialects. But here's where the biblical predictions get fascinating. In Zephaniah 3:9, written around 630 BC, there's a specific prophecy about language restoration. "Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder." The Hebrew word used here, safa, specifically refers to speech and language. Even more specific is Jeremiah 31:23, which predicts, "Once again they will use these words in the land of Judah and in its towns when I bring them back from captivity." The prophecy suggests that not only would Jews return to their land, but they would use their original language again. The linguistic challenge is immense. How do you revive a dead language? Linguists have documented thousands of attempts throughout history, and almost all fail spectacularly. Consider the examples. Irish Gaelic has been promoted by the Irish government for over a century, with mandatory classes in schools. Yet only 2% of Ireland's population speaks it fluently. Welsh has government support in Wales, but struggles to maintain even 20% fluency. Scotland has tried to revive Scottish Gaelic with limited success. These are languages that never completely died. They always had some native speakers. Hebrew was different. By the Middle Ages, virtually no one spoke Hebrew as their daily language. It existed only in religious texts and scholarly discussions. For centuries, the idea seemed absurd. When medieval scholars like Maimonides wrote in Hebrew, they were writing in what was essentially a dead language, like writing academic papers in ancient Greek today. Jewish communities developed their own languages: Yiddish, Hebrew plus German plus Slavic elements; Ladino, Hebrew plus Spanish; Judeo-Arabic, Hebrew plus Arabic, and others. These became their living languages, with Hebrew reserved for prayer and study. By 1800, the idea of Jews speaking Hebrew daily seemed as impossible as Romans suddenly speaking Latin in the streets of Rome. Then, something extraordinary happened in the late 1800s. A Lithuanian Jew named Eliezer ben Yehuda became obsessed with an idea that everyone thought was insane: reviving Hebrew as a spoken language. Born Eliezer Perlman, he was studying to be a rabbi when he had what he called a vision. He became convinced that for Jews to return to their homeland, they needed to speak their original language. In 1881, he immigrated to Jerusalem with his wife Deborah and made a radical decision. They would speak only Hebrew in their home. His wife initially thought he'd lost his mind. The obstacles were enormous. Biblical Hebrew had no words for newspaper, bicycle, electricity, or thousands of modern concepts. Ben Yehuda had to create them, drawing from Hebrew roots but inventing new terms. There were no native speakers. Ben Yehuda's son, Ben Zion, later called Itamar ben Avi, became the first native Hebrew speaker in over 1,600 years. Religious Jews believed Hebrew was too sacred for everyday use, reserved only for prayer and study, and literally threw stones at him. Biblical Hebrew also lacked many grammatical structures needed for modern conversation. So Ben Yehuda had to develop new rules while maintaining the language's ancient character. Despite the ridicule, Ben Yehuda persisted. He published the first modern Hebrew newspaper, Hazvi, the Deer, in 1884. He opened Hebrew schools. He convinced other families to join his experiment. By the 1890s, small groups of children in Jerusalem were playing games in Hebrew. By 1900, there were Hebrew-speaking neighbourhoods. His most ambitious project was creating a comprehensive Hebrew dictionary. He worked on it for decades, often 18 hours a day. When he died in 1922, he had completed 6 volumes. His wife and colleagues finished the remaining volumes. This wasn't just translation. He was literally rebuilding a language for modern use, creating over 4,000 new Hebrew words, many still used today. Here's where the prophecy aspect becomes remarkable. Ben Yehuda didn't start his Hebrew revival project until Jews began returning to their ancient homeland in significant numbers, the late 1800s. The language revival and the physical return happened simultaneously, exactly as Jeremiah 31:23 predicted. When Israel declared independence in 1948, Hebrew was ready to be the official language. Most successful language revivals take centuries. Hebrew went from dead language to national language in about 70 years. By 2024, over 9 million people speak Hebrew fluently worldwide. More Hebrew speakers today than at any point in ancient history. Modern Hebrew isn't just a religious or ceremonial language. It's used for science, technology, literature, business, and every aspect of modern life. Israeli tech companies conduct business in Hebrew. Universities teach quantum physics in Hebrew. Hebrew literature, music, and cinema now influence global culture, with Israeli authors writing bestsellers in Hebrew that are translated worldwide. Dr. Gilad Zuckerman, a leading expert in language revival, calls Hebrew's resurrection the only successful revival of a no longer spoken language in recorded history. That Latin was used continuously by scholars and the Catholic Church for 1,500 years, but nobody successfully revived it as a national language. Sanskrit has been preserved for millennia in India, but remains primarily religious. Ancient Greek evolved into modern Greek but never truly died first. Hebrew actually died as a spoken language and then came back to life. Linguists have no other example of this happening successfully. Linguist Nancy Dorian calculated that the odds of successfully reviving a dead language are less than 1 in 1,000, even with government support and motivated populations. Hebrew not only revived but became more widely spoken than ever before in its 3,000-year history. What makes this truly remarkable from a prophecy perspective is that the predictions weren't just that Hebrew would survive. They were that it would be restored when Jews returned to their land. Zephaniah 3:9 connects language restoration with people gathering. Then I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. The timing was perfect. Hebrew revival began in the 1880s, the same decade that Jewish immigration to Palestine increased dramatically. The language was ready when the nation was reborn in 1948. Today, Hebrew is not just surviving, it's thriving. Israel has a vibrant Hebrew literature scene, Hebrew rap music, Hebrew social media. Children in Tel Aviv grow up speaking Hebrew as naturally as children in London speak English. The prophecy wasn't just about preservation, it was about restoration. And that's exactly what happened. A language that was clinically dead for 1,800 years is now the living, breathing language of a modern nation. Linguists call it impossible. The Bible called it inevitable. Prophecy number 4, the return to the land. Now we get to the big one, the one that skeptics said would never happen. The return of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland after nearly 2,000 years of exile. This was not just one prophecy. It was predicted by multiple biblical prophets with startling specificity about timing, circumstances, and even the condition the land would be in when they returned. Jeremiah chapter 16, verses 14 to 15 states, "However, the days are coming when it will no longer be said, 'As surely as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites up out of Egypt,' but it will be said, 'As surely as the Lord lives who brought the Israelites up out of the land of the north and out of all the countries where he had banished them. For I will restore them to the land I gave their ancestors.'" Notice the specificity. They would return from the land of the north and all the countries. We will come back to how precisely this played out. Ezekiel was even more detailed in chapter 36 verse 24. "For I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land." But here is where it gets really specific. Isaiah chapter 11 verses 11 to 12 predicted not just that they would return, but when. "In that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth." The phrase, "a second time," is crucial. The first time was the return from Babylon around 538 years before Christ. The second time would be far greater in scope, from the four corners of the earth, not just one empire. For most of the past 2,000 years, this seemed absolutely impossible. After the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD, the land was controlled by various empires. Byzantine, 330 to 630 AD, Islamic Caliphates, 630 to 1099, Crusader States, 1099 to 1291, Mamluk Sultanate, 1291 to 1517, Ottoman Empire, 1517 to 1917, and finally British Mandate, 1917 to 1948. For Jews to return, they'd need permission from whoever controlled the land. For nearly 2,000 years, that seemed unlikely to impossible. By 1800, Jews were scattered across over 100 countries. They had built lives, businesses, and communities. Many Jewish communities had been in their host countries for centuries. German Jews considered themselves German patriots. French Jews were thoroughly French. American Jews were building the American dream. The idea of millions suddenly moving to a sparsely populated, underdeveloped region of the Ottoman Empire seemed absurd. Palestine in 1800 was largely undeveloped. Mark Twain, visiting in 1867, described it as a desolate country whose soil is rich enough but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. Politically, there was no Jewish nation, no international support for Jewish statehood, and no mechanism for large-scale immigration. The Ottoman Empire was not exactly welcoming to Jewish nationalism. Then, exactly as predicted, everything began to change, and the timing was remarkable. In 1878, the Congress of Berlin granted Jews some rights in the Ottoman Empire. That same year, the first modern Jewish agricultural settlement, Petah Tikva, was established in Palestine. Between 1881 and 1884, massive pogroms in Russia created what Jews call the First Aliyah, ascent or immigration to Israel. Jeremiah had specifically mentioned return from the land of the north, and Russia is directly north of Israel. From 1894 to 1906, the Dreyfus Affair in France and more Russian pogroms drove the Second Aliyah. The prophecies had predicted return would follow intense persecution. In 1917, Britain, now controlling Palestine, issued the Balfour Declaration, officially supporting the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, a major world power endorsed Jewish return to their ancient homeland. The largest immigration waves came from Russia and Eastern Europe, directly north of Israel, exactly as Jeremiah predicted. By 1948, Jews had immigrated from over 70 countries. Isaiah chapter 43 verses 5 to 6 predicted the directions. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. From the east, between 1948 and 1951, Operation Ezra and Nehemiah airlifted 120,000 Iraqi Jews, and Operation Magic Carpet brought 49,000 Yemeni Jews. Jews from Iran, India, and other Eastern countries immigrated in great numbers. From the West, Holocaust survivors from Europe and Jews from America and other Western countries came in large numbers. From the North, the Soviet Union for decades severely restricted Jewish emigration, producing the refuseniks. Then, starting in the 1970s, international pressure mounted, and after the Soviet collapse in 1991, over 1 million Soviet Jews immigrated to Israel. The land of the North finally gave them up. From the South, in the 1980s and 1990s, Operations Moses and Solomon airlifted thousands of Ethiopian Jews, and Jews from South Africa and other southern regions also immigrated. Ezekiel chapter 4 verses 3 to 6 contains a cryptic mathematical prophecy about the duration of exile. Using the day-year principle, common in biblical prophecy interpretation, scholars calculated that from the Babylonian exile to the return would be approximately 2,520 years. Starting from 606 years before Christ, when Babylon first besieged Jerusalem, adding 2,520 years, accounting for no year zero, brings you to 1914 to 1917, exactly when Britain took control of Palestine and issued the Balfour Declaration. The prophet Daniel predicted that Jerusalem would be trampled by the Gentiles for a specific period, calculated to end in 1917, the exact year the Ottoman Empire lost control of Jerusalem to the British. Jesus predicted in Matthew chapter 24 verses 32 to 34 that the generation that sees Israel's return would not pass away before all prophecies were fulfilled. If a biblical generation is 70 to 80 years from 1948, we are living in that time frame. The circumstances of the return were nothing short of miraculous. Without World War I, the Ottoman Empire might never have fallen. Without the Holocaust, the United Nations might never have voted for partition in 1947. President Truman recognized Israel 11 minutes after independence, citing his understanding of biblical prophecy. Incredibly, the Soviet Union also supported Israel's creation, providing weapons through Czechoslovakia, a Cold War cooperation never repeated. Isaiah chapter 35 verses 1 to 2 predicted, "The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, it will burst into bloom." When Jews began returning, the land was largely desolate, but as they returned, they transformed it, exactly as predicted. Zechariah chapter 4 verse 6 predicted the return would happen. "Not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit." The Jewish return was not accomplished through military conquest, but through land purchases from Arab landowners, international legal recognition, immigration rather than invasion, and agricultural development rather than expansion. The pace of immigration accelerated exactly as the prophecies suggested, especially when persecution intensified. Between 1882 and 1903, 25,000 Jews immigrated in the first Aliyah. From 1904 to 1914, 40,000 came in the second Aliyah. From 1919 to 1923, 35,000 arrived in the third Aliyah. From 1924 to 1929, 82,000 came in the fourth Aliyah. From 1929 to 1939, 250,000 arrived, driven by the Nazi rise to power. From 1948 to 1951, 687,000 Jews immigrated after the Holocaust. The pattern matched Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 3 exactly. "When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and gather you again from all the nations." On May 14th, 1948, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, local time, David Ben-Gurion stood in the Tel Aviv Museum and read Israel's Declaration of Independence. After nearly 2,000 years, the prophecies had come to pass. Arab nations immediately attacked, outnumbering Israel 50 to 1, yet Israel survived and thrived. Amos chapter 9 verse 15 declared, "I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them." For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were home, not as refugees, not as guests, not as a persecuted minority, but as a sovereign nation in their ancient homeland. The return that seemed impossible for 2 millennia had become reality in less than 70 years. Prophecy number 3, the desert blooming. The transformation of Israel from barren wasteland to agricultural powerhouse represents one of the most dramatic fulfillments of biblical prophecy in modern times. Multiple ancient texts predicted this seemingly impossible agricultural miracle with remarkable specificity. Isaiah chapter 35 verse 1 proclaimed, "The desert and the parched land will be glad, the wilderness will rejoice and blossom." This was not merely poetic language. It was a concrete prediction about the physical transformation of a specific geographic region. The prophecies went even further, connecting this agricultural revival directly to the return of the Jewish people. Isaiah chapter 27 verse 6 declared, "In days to come Jacob will take root, Israel will bud and blossom and fill all the world with fruit." Notice the global scope of this prediction, not just local prosperity, but worldwide impact. Ezekiel chapter 36 verse 30 added another crucial detail. I will increase the fruit of the trees and the crops of the field, so that you will no longer suffer disgrace among the nations because of famine. This prophecy specifically predicted that Israel would transition from a land suffering famine to one that would help other nations overcome their own agricultural challenges. Under Ottoman rule from 1517 to 1917, the land suffered from neglect, overtaxation, and poor agricultural policies. Centuries of deforestation, overgrazing, and lack of investment had transformed what was once described in biblical times as a land flowing with milk and honey into a landscape of swamps, deserts, and barren hills. The situation was so dire that by the late 19th century, the land could barely support its sparse population. Malaria-infested swamps dominated the coastal plains. The Negev desert seemed utterly lifeless, and the hill country was largely stripped of vegetation. Multiple travellers and historians of the era consistently reported similar scenes of desolation. What makes this transformation truly remarkable is the scale and speed of the change. When Israel was established in 1948, approximately 60% of the country was desert, much of the rest was swampland or rocky hills, and the entire nation had fewer trees than many individual American counties. Today, Israel has become an agricultural superpower despite its challenging geography. The Negev desert, covering 60% of Israel's landmass, was considered utterly barren just decades ago. Today, this same desert produces crops year-round using innovative techniques like precision drip, irrigation systems that deliver exact amounts of water and nutrients directly to plant roots, desalination technology that turns seawater into agricultural irrigation water, greenhouse technology that creates optimal growing conditions in harsh climates, and computerized monitoring systems that track every aspect of plant growth. Israeli agricultural scientists have developed technologies that seemed like science fiction just a generation ago. Plants that can grow in salt water, computerized irrigation systems that adjust water delivery based on plant needs, biological pest control methods that eliminate the need for harmful chemicals, and soil-less growing techniques that produce massive yields in minimal space. The prophecies did not just predict local agricultural success, they specifically mentioned global impact. Today, Israel exports billions of dollars worth of agricultural products annually, including fresh flowers to European markets even in winter, citrus fruits and exotic produce to Asia, advanced agricultural technology to countries worldwide, and seeds and plants specifically designed for harsh climates. The timing is also significant. The prophecies explicitly connected the agricultural revival to the return of the Jewish people to their land. Isaiah chapter 27 verse 6 uses the metaphor of Jacob taking root, referring to the descendants of Jacob, or Israel, literally re-establishing roots in their ancestral homeland. Ezekiel's prophecy about Israel no longer suffering disgrace among the nations because of famine has been fulfilled unexpectedly. Not only does Israel not suffer from famine, but it actively helps other nations overcome their own agricultural challenges. The specific geographic features mentioned in prophecy, deserts, parched land, wilderness, directly correspond to the Negev desert and other arid regions that are now flourishing agricultural areas. Today, Israeli agricultural technology feeds millions of people worldwide. The nation that was mostly desert and swamp a century ago now provides agricultural consulting to countries across Africa, helping them overcome drought and food insecurity, exports farming technology to nations in Asia struggling with water scarcity, shares irrigation techniques with South American countries facing climate challenges, and develops crop varieties specifically designed for harsh climates that are used globally. Israel produces 95% of its own food, despite having a mostly desert climate. Israeli agricultural exports exceed $2 billion annually. The country uses 50% less water per unit of agricultural output than the global average, and Israeli agricultural technology is used in over 140 countries worldwide. The prophecy in Isaiah about Israel filling all the world with fruit finds literal fulfillment in how Israeli agricultural innovations help feed people globally. From drought-resistant crops developed in Israeli laboratories to irrigation systems designed in the Negev desert, Israeli agricultural technology addresses food security challenges across continents. What makes this transformation truly extraordinary is that it defies every conventional understanding of agricultural development. Typically, agricultural civilizations develop in areas with abundant freshwater sources, fertile soil, favorable climate conditions, and large amounts of arable land. Israel succeeded despite having extremely limited freshwater resources, mostly desert or poor quality soil, a harsh, arid climate over much of the country, and minimal arable land by conventional standards. This reversal of typical agricultural prerequisites aligns remarkably with the prophetic emphasis on this transformation being supernatural rather than natural. No comparable transformation exists in modern agricultural history. Other nations have improved their farming techniques gradually over generations, but no other country has transformed from mostly uninhabitable desert to agricultural exporter in just a few decades. The speed, scale, and success of Israel's agricultural transformation, combined with its precise alignment with ancient prophecies written thousands of years before modern irrigation technology even existed, represents one of the most documented cases of prophetic fulfillment in the modern era. The desert has indeed bloomed, and its fruit is feeding the world, exactly as the ancient prophecies predicted. Prophecy number 2, the ingathering from specific regions. Among all ancient prophecies, few demonstrate the specificity and accuracy found in the biblical predictions about Jewish return to Israel. Written over 2,500 years ago, these prophecies did not just predict a general return. They provided a detailed geographic roadmap that would be fulfilled with stunning precision in the modern era. Isaiah chapter 43 verses 5 to 6 serves as the master prophecy. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bring your children from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, do not hold them back. This passage is remarkable for several reasons. First, it predicts immigration from all 4 cardinal directions, something that would require Jews to be scattered globally. Second, it suggests different attitudes from different regions, some willing, others reluctant. Third, it implies divine intervention would be necessary to facilitate these movements. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 11 adds even more specific detail. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, and from the islands of the Mediterranean. The precision is breathtaking. This prophecy names specific ancient regions that correspond to modern countries from which Jews would return thousands of years later. From the east, the fulfillment began dramatically between 1948 and 1951, with Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, one of the most extraordinary mass migrations in modern history. The Iraqi Jewish community, which traced its roots back to the Babylonian exile 2,500 years earlier, numbered over 130,000 people by 1948. For centuries, Iraqi Jews had been integral to Iraqi society: merchants, bankers, government officials, and professionals. Yet within just a few years, virtually the entire community immigrated to Israel. Between May 1950 and September 1951, 121,512 Iraqi Jews were flown to Israel in 428 flights. Entire synagogues emptied overnight. Ancient Jewish communities that had existed since biblical times simply ceased to exist in Iraq, with nearly 100% of the population relocating to Israel. Iran, the ancient Persia or Elam mentioned in prophecy, represents another precise fulfillment. The Jewish community in Iran dated back to biblical times when Persian King Cyrus allowed Jews to return from Babylonian exile. After 1948, approximately 25,000 Iranian Jews immigrated to Israel in the first wave. Following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, another significant wave brought the total to over 75,000 Iranian Jews who have immigrated to Israel, representing about 60% of Iran's pre-revolution Jewish population. Jews from India represent one of the most unique communities. The Bene Israel of Maharashtra claimed descent from Jews who arrived after a shipwreck over 2,000 years ago. The Cochin Jews of Kerala trace their origins to the time of King Solomon. These ancient eastern communities, numbering in the tens of thousands, began immigrating to Israel starting in 1948. Perhaps the most dramatic eastern immigration was Operation Magic Carpet between 1949 and 1950, which brought nearly 49,000 Yemenite Jews to Israel. Many of these Jews had never seen an airplane and believed the prophecy in Exodus chapter 19 verse 4 was being fulfilled. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagles' wings and brought you to myself. From the West, immigration took on tragic dimensions with the Holocaust, which destroyed ancient Jewish communities across Europe. Survivors from displaced persons camps, along with established Jewish communities in Western Europe and the Americas, immigrated to Israel in fulfillment of the "Gather you from the West" prophecy. While hundreds of thousands of American Jews could have immigrated to Israel, most chose to remain in the United States. However, significant numbers did make Aliyah, particularly during Israel's formative years and again during periods of American Jewish spiritual awakening. One of the most significant Western immigrations was Operation Exodus in the 1990s, which brought Jews from the former Soviet territories. While geographically these immigrants came from the north, many had been displaced westward during Soviet times, fulfilling both directional prophecies simultaneously. From the north, the phrase, "I will say to the north, give them up," contains remarkable prophetic insight. The Hebrew word used suggests reluctance, resistance, and the need for divine or external pressure to release the people. This description perfectly matches the Soviet experience. For decades, from the 1960s to the 1980s, the Soviet Union maintained strict restrictions on Jewish emigration. Jews who applied to leave faced loss of employment and professional licenses, harassment by secret police, social ostracism, and family separation, long prison sentences for so-called anti-Soviet activity, and denial of applications with no explanation or appeal. These Jews became known as refuseniks. People refused permission to emigrate. Famous cases like Anatoly Sharansky, Ida Nudel, and Yuli Edelstein became international symbols of Soviet oppression. The USSR literally held them back, precisely as Isaiah had prophesied. The prophecy also states that God would command the North to give them up, implying external pressure would force the release. This began manifesting through international campaigns such as the Jackson-Vanik Amendment of 1974, which tied United States-Soviet trade to Jewish emigration rights. Massive public demonstrations in Washington, D.C., with over 250,000 people demanding Soviet Jewish freedom. Diplomatic pressure from multiple Western governments, and celebrity campaigns that brought global scrutiny to the USSR's treatment of Jews. In 1987, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev began allowing increased Jewish emigration. By 1989, the floodgates opened. The Berlin Wall fell, and the Soviet Union itself began collapsing. After the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, the fulfillment accelerated dramatically. Over 1 million Jews immigrated to Israel from former Soviet territories. Entire Jewish communities from cities like Kiev, Moscow, and St. Petersburg relocated. The immigration was so massive, it increased Israel's population by nearly 20%. Russian became Israel's second most common language after Hebrew. From the south, the prophecy found its most dramatic fulfillment in the Ethiopian Jewish rescue operations. Ethiopian Jews, known as Beta Israel, claimed descent from the biblical tribe of Dan and had practiced Judaism for centuries in isolation. Operation Moses, from 1984 to 1985, took place during Ethiopian famine and civil war. Israel secretly airlifted 8,000 Ethiopian Jews through Sudan in one of the most daring rescue operations in modern history. Operation Solomon in 1991 saw Israel evacuate 14,325 Ethiopian Jews in just 34 flights over 36 hours as the Ethiopian government collapsed. Pregnant women gave birth on the aircraft, and babies born at 35,000 feet became Israeli citizens before touching ground. Political instability in South Africa after the fall of apartheid also prompted significant Jewish immigration to Israel. Between 1990 and 2005, over 25,000 South African Jews immigrated, representing about 25% of that community. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 11's naming of ancient regions demonstrates remarkable prophetic precision. Assyria corresponds to modern-day Syria and Iraq, fulfilled through Iraqi and Syrian Jewish immigration. Lower and Upper Egypt saw immigration after 1948, particularly following the 1956 Suez Crisis. Cush, or Ethiopia, was fulfilled through Operations Moses and Solomon. Elam, ancient Persia or Iran, was fulfilled through Iranian Jewish immigration. Babylonia, or Iraq, was fulfilled through Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. Hamath, in northern Syria, saw Jewish immigration after 1948. The islands of the Mediterranean, including Cyprus and Rhodes, housed Jewish communities that immigrated to Israel. Cyprus also served as a British detention centre for Jewish immigrants trying to reach Palestine illegally, making it a literal stepping stone in the prophetic fulfilment. From 1948 to 2020, over 600,000 immigrants came from the East, including Iraq, Iran, India, Yemen, and Central Asia. Over 800,000 from the West, including Europe, the Americas, and Australia. Over 1,200,000 from the North, primarily from the former Soviet Union, and over 150,000 from the South, including Ethiopia, South Africa, and other African nations. No other ancient prophecy predicts population movements with this level of geographic specificity. The fulfillment required Jews to be scattered to all four directions globally, political conditions that would motivate or force emigration, a restored Jewish homeland to receive them, transportation technology to facilitate mass movement, and international political arrangements to allow the movements. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 11 specifies, this would be the second time God would gather his people, the first being the return from Babylonian exile. This distinction is crucial because it differentiates between the ancient return under Ezra and Nehemiah and the modern return after 1948. The prophecy also implies a sudden, accelerated gathering rather than gradual immigration over centuries. The statistics confirm this pattern. Between 1948 and 1951, 687,000 immigrants arrived, including the entire Iraqi community. Between 1989 and 1999, over 1 million immigrants arrived, primarily from the former Soviet Union. And between 1984 and 1991, 22,000 Ethiopian Jews arrived in just two major operations. History records no comparable example of an ancient people maintaining distinct identity after 2,000 years of dispersion, mass immigration from all four cardinal directions simultaneously, specific geographic predictions fulfilled with such precision, or ancient prophecies naming regions that would be sources of return millennia later. The ingathering prophecies represent one of the most documented and precisely fulfilled prophetic sequences in human history, involving millions of people across dozens of countries over multiple decades, all following a geographic pattern laid out in texts written over 2 millennia before modern transportation even existed. Prophecy number 1. Israel reborn in one day. The declaration of the modern State of Israel on May 14, 1948, stands as one of the most astonishing moments in modern history, and one that mirrors a prophecy recorded over 2.5 millennia earlier. The event was unprecedented. A nation that had been absent from the world map for nearly 2,000 years was suddenly restored, and its rebirth happened literally in a single day. The prophetic foundation comes from Isaiah chapter 66 verse 8. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Written during a time when Israel still existed as a kingdom, this verse posed an almost sarcastic question to the reader. Could a nation simply appear, fully formed, in the span of a day? History would later answer with a resounding yes. On that Friday afternoon in 1948, David Ben-Gurion stood before members of the Jewish People's Council in Tel Aviv and proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. The ceremony was brief, lasting less than an hour. Within minutes, the new government had adopted a Declaration of Independence, selected a national flag, and confirmed Hebrew as the official language. The name Israel, unused for a sovereign state since ancient times, was restored in an instant. What makes the moment even more remarkable is the context in which it happened. The British mandate over Palestine was set to expire at midnight. The United Nations had voted months earlier to partition the territory into separate Jewish and Arab states. But escalating violence made the future deeply uncertain. The leadership knew that if they delayed the declaration, the opportunity might vanish forever. Yet if they declared independence, they faced the near certainty of an immediate attack. Still, the decision was made. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Ben-Gurion's voice carried over the airwaves. The State of Israel is established. For the first time in nearly 2 millennia, the Jewish people once again had a sovereign homeland. By the time the clock struck midnight, Israel had been officially recognized by the United States, with President Harry S. Truman sending a message of formal acknowledgement just 11 minutes after the announcement. The Soviet Union extended recognition soon after. In the span of a few hours, the prophetic image of a nation being born in a day had moved from scripture to global headlines. The timing was extraordinary, not only in terms of speed but also in terms of historical improbability. Throughout recorded history, nations that lost sovereignty for centuries simply disappeared into the cultures around them. Their languages faded, their traditions dissolved, and their names became little more than entries in archaeological records. Yet the Jewish people retained their identity, their traditions, and their deep connection to the land of their ancestors, so much so that when the chance came to reclaim it, they could do so instantly. This sudden rebirth also occurred against the backdrop of profound global change. The end of the Second World War had left the world divided into emerging superpowers, with the Cold War just beginning. Colonial empires were collapsing, new nations were forming across Asia and Africa, and the concept of self-determination was reshaping geopolitics. Still, the reappearance of Israel was unique. It was not the result of gradual decolonization or internal rebellion, but rather a swift, decisive act that aligned with an ancient prophetic narrative. The day after the declaration, 5 Arab armies, Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, invaded, intending to crush the newborn state before it could take root. Many military analysts at the time predicted that the war would be over in weeks and that Israel would be erased as quickly as it had appeared. Yet, despite being vastly outnumbered and under-equipped, the new state not only survived but expanded its territory beyond the original UN partition plan. The prophecy's imagery of a nation born in a single day proved more than symbolic. It was a living reality that endured through fire. For many observers, the speed and completeness of Israel's restoration in 1948 defied all historical precedent. Empires had risen and fallen, peoples had been scattered and absorbed, borders had been redrawn countless times. Yet here was a people who had maintained a distinct national identity without a homeland for nearly 20 centuries. And then, in one remarkable afternoon, reappeared as a functioning, recognised state. In the annals of prophecy, few events carry the same clarity of fulfilment as this one. Isaiah's question, "Shall a nation be born at once?" was not merely a rhetorical flourish. It was a declaration of something humanly impossible, yet divinely orchestrated. On May 14th, 1948, that impossibility became history. Now, what you make of all this is up to you. Some see divine intervention, others see remarkable historical coincidences. Still others argue that some prophecies were self-fulfilling, that people made them come true because they believed in them. But here's what's undeniable. Ancient texts written thousands of years ago predicted events that seemed impossible at the time, yet came true with stunning accuracy. The rebirth of Israel after nearly 2,000 years, the revival of Hebrew, the specific patterns of return. These aren't vague predictions that could be interpreted multiple ways. They're specific, measurable events that either happened or they didn't. And they did. Whether you believe these are divine prophecies or incredible coincidences, the story of Israel's rebirth remains one of the most remarkable in human history. A people who should have disappeared into the pages of history not only survived but returned to their ancient homeland and thrived. The skeptics who once dismissed these prophecies as impossible have been proven wrong by history itself. Sometimes, the most unbelievable predictions turn out to be the most accurate ones of all. And that, perhaps, is the most remarkable prophecy of all, that people would doubt these predictions until they saw them fulfilled with their own eyes.